I hope to have something brilliant to share. And I really just want to say thank you to Frank. I'll never forget him.
I met Frank when I was in graduate school at Yale, and he was my final studio professor. I had the good fortune to travel with him and the rest of my classmates to Istanbul, and he made such a lasting impression on all of us. How informal and genius he could be always at the same time. I was in my final review when he offered me a position at Gehry's in Los Angeles. I think because I had drawn some things that he liked and did some modeling that maybe made him smile. It was a great opportunity. And I think he also recognized that women in our field aren't always appreciated. I got to travel with him and Sammy to Berlin for a competition. And so spending some even more time travel and talking about architecture was one of the highlights of my life that he gave me. He gave me so many opportunities and really changed my life. I wouldn't have met my husband had I not worked there. I probably wouldn't be in the position or any of the positions I've had I not been given the opportunities that year. He has made such an impact on so many lives. Rest in peace.
Hi, my name is Peter Buffington, and I worked in Frank's office from 2005, 6, 7, and 8, and just wanted to share my sort of experience there. And the one thing I think that really stood out in comparison to other offices was that the staff was really quite incredible. Just a crew of very dedicated, incredibly bright people who were always innovating, even intentionally and by accident. And that to me was always a really valuable exercise and really great experience. And I'm really grateful for the years that I had there, really intense. And, like I said, all kinds of great people. And, thanks to Frank for really creating that sort of innovative mindset for the whole team. Thanks.
Hi. Bonjour. I'm Edwin. I'm at the Foundation Louis Vuitton in Paris. This is the last project that Frank and I worked on together before I left the office to start my own office at EC3. Some of you may already know that Frank had spent a year in Paris before he started his own office. So Paris has always been a very special place for Frank and for me. When Frank was in Paris, he had developed a close relationship with the visionary French architect Paul Parot, who encouraged Frank to break the modernist box. And when Frank and I visited this site for FLV for the first time at the Jardin d'Habitation, I remember Frank telling me that it reminds him of his favorite writer, Marcel Proust. And what he meant was that the site captures the feeling that was expressed in Proust's masterpiece, Remembrance of Lost Time. So, when we look at the architecture, the glass sails, the icebergs, we should always be remembered that Frank's genius is about being able to capture the emotional impact of architecture. And in remembering lost time, I think what Frank meant was not about nostalgia, because he's always moving forward, future looking. Because I think that's how Frank wants to be remembered. Frank, you're always timeless, and you'll always be my inspiration. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Frank was my boss, my mentor, my teacher, my architect. I worked for him for 10 years. I worked at the Guggenheim as a director of architectural projects, and he was designing the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi for 5 years. And he was my teacher at graduate school. When I was leaving New York City to go to Yale with no background in architecture and just a intuitive sense that it's what I was meant to do, my roommate, who I shared my little apartment with, and half of my room was a sculpture studio, she came running out while I was sitting in the front seat with my dad in the U-Haul and gave me this wrapped present that turned out to be this portrait of Bilbao. And she wrote in the back of it, "Kara, to always remind you why you have chosen this pursuit. Love always and forever, Kira." I didn't know at the time, I didn't know who he was. I definitely related to the building. It really spoke to me, as it clearly spoke to millions of people. It really changed what I thought architecture could be or should be. It really inspired me to think about how architectural spaces can transform who people become. And I've often thought about being a young child, being myself when I was like 8 years old, and confronted with a building like Bilbao, and how that building represents human possibility. It's so much more than a building. It lets you know that being different is something aspirational. And I think that there's a way to nurture people by presenting these kinds of concepts in the built world. I think Frank was a profound influence, not just on the built world, but on what is possible with people and rising everybody up. It's going to take me years to digest his lessons. They're ingrained, and they were, I think, more intentional than I realized. It's an incredible mentor, incredible human. I'll miss him.
Hi, my name's Susanna Dickinson, and I started at FOGA in February 1999, just after I graduated grad school. And I remember it was a week or two just prior to Frank's 70th birthday. And I was included on this montage card that was created with the faces of all the employees on the Dusseldorf project. I had the privilege of working there over 5 years, and for the last 15 years I've been in full-time academia here at the University of Arizona, and have been fortunate to see 4 of my students work there too, and seen the impact that's had on them, which is pretty amazing. Over the last week since his death, I'd had time to reflect on my time there and him as an architect. I just think his importance, I mean, I would say him and Louis Kahn are the most important US-based architects since Frank Lloyd Wright. And I think that influence is only going to increase over time. My office experience was generally really positive. partly because of the, design-based projects we worked on and the people and the friends that I made there. In your little project teams, you became pretty, tight-knit, really, because of the intensity of the work. The office was fairly hierarchical, and Frank was aware of that. But I had the opportunity of several one-on-one conversations for various reasons. I decided to leave because I was relocating to New Haven and went in personally to tell him about this. And he was just very kind about it, and very human. And he offered to call Caesar Pelli for me because he'd known him from when he'd worked at Gruen, and so made my transition really easy. I guess the last time I saw him was in New Haven, ironically at one of Bob Stern's parties a couple of years later when Frank was teaching there. And we had a conversation then too. I just want to send my regards and support to Berta and his family, and thank you so much. I really had, it's a very meaningful part of my life.
I'm Michael Kilkelly, and I worked at Gehry Partners from 2005 to 2012. And then 2012, I ended up moving back to the East Coast, where I'm from originally. But I stayed on at Gehry Partners as a consultant till about 2021. So I had a good 16-year experience with the firm. And what I'm most grateful for and what I really remember most from that time was the office culture and the people. I worked more so on the production side. So I didn't interact with Frank all that often. I would see him around the office. I would see him in project meetings occasionally. But really the people that he gathered around him were really top notch. Like I still have a lot of good friends from that time. And he was able to create a culture in the office that was very intense. Like we worked a lot, but it was also laid back and relaxed at the same time. Like you had to do your job. You had to do it at a high level, but it was incredibly professional and very well run, given that the complexity and just the nature of the projects. And so I really worked with some of the best people I worked with in my whole career was at Gehry Partners. There was also a culture of kind of giving gifts when people left. So when I left the office in 2012, I was working on the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi project. And so my teammates and my colleagues got together and they built me a custom Gehry laptop. So I was very much on the kind of technology side. I did a lot of work on CAD and CAD management within the project. So I got my own laptop. Doesn't work. It's not functioning, but it's laser cut, so it's cool. And I've got, so I never forget some of the drawings I worked on. Here you can see they gave me a memento and everybody signed it on the back. So this is, a memento of my time that I really cherish and treasure. And again, it's a reminder of just the caliber of the people, the quality, like even in their gifts, it was really thoughtful, really well done. And, my time at Gehry Partners was really kind of transformative for me. And it's taken me in new directions in my career that I probably wouldn't have had I not worked there. So I'm really grateful for that experience. I'm grateful for the culture that Frank created. And, I just wanted to say, thanks, Frank.
I joined Frank's office at a very interesting point in his career. He had just revived the Disney Concert Hall project, and he understood that in order to execute that project in North America, he needed to take on the entire process and produce it start to finish himself. In order to do so, he assembled a most amazing group of people. We would evaluate all the methods that were traditionally used by architects, and we determined whether they were still valid and effective or whether they needed to be replaced with something else. At times, the office felt like a mad workshop of medieval model builders producing large models or full-size mock-ups in the parking lot, as well as other people putting all this stuff into the computer and converting it into mathematically perfect geometry. The contractors were involved in that process too, because they needed to translate all this information into information that they could use on the site to produce the actual buildings. Frank is rightfully remembered as an amazing architect, but I think he should also be remembered for having had the guts to assemble maybe the most competent technical office that I had ever seen. Frank understood that in order to be a great architect, you need to design well, but you also need to not be limited by your ability to execute your own designs. Frank created whole processes from start to finish that are used the world over whenever a complicated building is being produced somewhere. It was a joy to be part of that process. Thank you, Frank, for letting me be part of that, and rest in peace.
First of all, I want to say my condolences to Berta, Sammy, and Alejo, and the whole Gehry family. It's so sad what happened. But I would say Frank lived an amazing life. Secondly, I want to say I'm so thankful for the time I spent in the office, the opportunities I had through Gehry Partners, the people, the whole condition that Frank made, which was such an amazing learning experience. And lastly, just the time I got to spend with Frank and the little bit I got to understand about how he saw the world and how one might interpret that into architecture. And that was, I mean, it changed my life, and I know it changed many others who had the experience. And thank you, Frank. Thank you for all of that.
It's been several years since I worked at Gehry Partners, longer than I care to admit. But while I was thinking of something that I wanted to contribute, all the little memories started to coalesce, and I noticed a theme. And the theme was that, one, it was a very busy place. There were people everywhere all the time during business hours. Sometimes you'd be all alone at night, your little team working on a deadline. But I digress. Usually, it was a very busy place, and there were people everywhere, and there were deadlines, and there were team meetings, and there were client meetings, and there were consultant meetings, and models being built, and 3D models being worked on, and coordination between all these things, and 3D scans. I mean, you name it. And it was happening all the time, every day. So what I noticed was when I had one-on-one time with Frank was only when I was building a physical model. And it didn't have to be, a big showstopper model like the main building or, the final model or something that he really wanted to go over with a fine-tooth comb. It could be anything. I was working on little models of pottery for the Orr Museum, or I was working on a baby grand piano model for Beekman. I did some tiny scale models for like large site plans, and those are the things that would really stop them in his tracks and make him stop and look and talk to me. And those were very useful to me because, one, obviously it was a huge honor to have, Frank come and stop at your desk. But two, I realized his point of view as an architect and as a designer was that the 3D model was secondary to the physical model. And all the design happened in a physical model. The 3D software was there as a recording tool and a documentation tool and a way to get the physical into the 2D, let's say, for drawing. And I worked on 3D models a lot also. I did a lot of, I called it CATIA. I think they call it something else now. But he never stopped and looked at the digital model. He never stopped at the computer and wanted to see the computer model. But he did stop and look at the physical model. And that's really where his interest was, from my perspective. That's what brought him out. And that's what he liked to look at. And, it's changed me as a designer because, you go to architecture school and they teach you all this fancy software and you think this is it, this is the way things are going. And then you go to an office where you're reminded that you're building a building. You're not drawing a drawing. And the 3D physical representation is crucial for understanding what you're really putting out there. And that's something I didn't really have appreciation for before I worked there. And, if you put lights in a model, forget about it. He was like so happy. Like he loved putting lights and things. I mean, simple things would really catch his attention. And that was very interesting to me at that time. And now I look back and I realize that lighting, physical space, the quality of, the attention to detail, all of those things are what really matter when you're building a building anyway. So that's very educational for me. And obviously those memories I will cherish forever because it was special. And I did get to have one-on-one time with Frank. And, obviously this is a huge honor for anybody. So I'm really glad I had that experience working there.
Beyond the extraordinary experience of working on Frank's projects, what stayed with me the most are the friendships that we're able to develop while working at the office. Frank built an office that was truly global. He hired people from almost every country in the world. In my own experience, when I joined the office, I sat next to an Israeli architect, Amit. I grew up in Syria, and at the time our countries were sworn enemies. And I until that point, I've never met an Israeli before. But having to sit there, collaborate, talk, learn more about each other, we developed a deep friendship. It allowed me to understand more what he is and others like him are experiencing. It allowed me to become more empathetic, more accepting of others. And our friendship went on to last till today. And that's the legacies of Frank's office to me. The friendships we build that continue to shape our lives still today. I can travel almost to any major city in the world, and I know there's going to be somewhere close by an ex-Gehry colleague that I can connect with and reach out to and connect with instantly. Thank you, Frank, for the work, for the culture, and the connections that you allowed us to develop and that continue to shape our lives till today.
So I wanted to talk a bit about Frank's legacy as it pertains to the role of technology in the architectural and building industries. And in the 20th century, early part of the 21st century, there was no firm on the planet that was more visibly and closely associated with the advanced progression of these new technologies, building information modeling, 3D modeling, design for manufacturing, supply chain integration. That constellation of technologies in Gehry Partners, it really was the leading protagonist of those technologies in the building industries. And I always thought that was a bit ironic because Frank was not a technophile. And in fact, he didn't like the quality of the images that were coming out of rendering software in those days. He found them lifeless and really sort of, wanted that sort of physical quality that was absent from 3D rendering at the time. But he saw, I think to his credit, the remarkable potential of digital technology to transform the processes of building. And for him, that meant putting more agency and power in the hands of architects. And by driving the use of 3D modeling, building information modeling, those technologies, and leading the building delivery team in the use of those technologies, for him, I think that was clearly an opportunity for agency. I think he had a lifelong mission around empowering the architect and design in the built environment and building delivery. And he saw that by harnessing these technologies and leading their use, that put power in the hands of architects. And so when it came down to questions of professional opinion about whether things could be built or what their cost was, the tools could support the architect's decisions, both in terms of aesthetic design, but also in terms of the functionality of these building systems. And so I always really gave him a lot of credit in his commitment to those technologies. At the time, I think Frank invested financially in terms of his brand and reputation, and in terms of the positioning of the firm in driving these technologies that I think, again, for him were not a source of intrinsic fascination, but were rather something that supported his lifelong agendas. And in the early 20th century, there was no greater sort of crucible of innovation, and everybody wanted to come to Gehry Partners and work on both these incredible designs, but also this amazing advancing use of technologies that we were experimenting with at the time. I remember Frank talking about, on the design side, that at some point you and the client just have to jump off the cliff together. And I think, the creation of Gehry Technologies, the use of technology was, emblematic of that notion that at some point, if you want to achieve the future, you just have to jump off the cliff and then be super diligent and super committed to getting things, getting agendas that you start to work. And, I think it was an amazing experience for everybody that was involved, a life-transforming experience. So many people have come out and talked about how this was one of the most incredibly transformative experiences to work in that with Frank, with those projects, and with that community. And I certainly would count myself as one of those people that was fundamentally transformed by that experience.
Hi, my name's Gehry von Oyen. I was an associate at Gehry Partners, working there from 2005 to 2011. I was hired by Edwin Chan out of the Harvard GSD in spring of 2025, and I began work that summer in the beginning of July. I was hired to work on the Fondation Louis Vuitton project in Paris, project I stayed on for about 4 years, from concept design through mock-ups and the beginning of construction. We worked a lot of hours on that project, and it was a really profound part of my architectural education. We traveled to Paris all the time, bringing the concept models, bringing the design models, the DD models. We sort of moved and evolved the models as we went, and lots of times presenting to LVMH and Bernard Arnault and his team. In one of those trips, Frank was talking to me. He knew I was a sailor. He knew I'd sailed at Stanford. He knew I sailed on the office sailing team, which was on his old boat partner's boat, Bruce Bilson, lovely gentleman. We sailed on Celerity, and Frank, he wanted his own boat at this point, and he had one that he had with some other partners, but he really wanted his own, and he wanted something a little faster than he had. He wanted something that was more like a racer and cruiser. And anyway, when we were in Paris, we were talking about sailing, and Frank asked me, Jeff, can you go to the Paris boat show and go check out, what boats are out there, because I'm looking to get one. I'd appreciate your advice. And, I was like a kid in the candy shop going to see these boats for Frank. I was like, yes, sir, I'd love to. Went there and enjoyed going to the boat show, looked at some Hansas and some Beneteaus and a lot of different European makes of boats. And I think at the end, the Beneteaus were where he was heading. And I gave him a rundown on what I'd seen after seeing the Paris Boat Show. And back in LA, he set up a meeting with the local Beneteau dealer, wonderful guy, Jean-Marie Cabri. He was a French gentleman living in Los Angeles, wonderful sailor. He was meeting there with Frank in Frank's office and telling him that, you had to go on this race. He's like, Frank, you have to do the Cabo race on the Beneteau. You're going to love it. You're going to love how he sails downwind. It's so beautiful, beautiful boat. And Frank was interested. It was a Beneteau 447 that we were looking at. And Frank said, I don't have time for that. Do you see this office out here? And gesturing to the office. I don't have time to do that. But he pointed at me and he said, but he does. And I said, okay. And Frank sent me for a week on the Cabo race, which was Newport Beach to Cabo San Lucas. And I did the race, offshore race on this Beneteau 447. I had a wonderful time, finished in Cabo, swam through the Arc. It was really just a great trip with some wonderful sailors. And came back to the office and flew back, reported, and said, Frank, I really think this is a great boat. You should go for it. And Frank went and bought the sister ship to that boat and named it Foggy, Foggy, and kept it at Cal Yacht Club in Marina del Rey, where he'd been a member for a long time. Frank was incredibly generous with this boat. He let me run a sailing team on it with colleagues in the office. And I was the skipper and helmsman of Foggy on Wednesday nights at the Sunset Series, as well as a number of weekend point-to-point races around Southern California. And we just had a lovely time doing that. Jamie Norden was our bowman, and we had Andy Thompson, Frank Weeks, Henry Bronner, Peter Drasnin, all sorts of folks who had a lot of sailing experience and were really able to contribute to the team, and all of whom remain friends to this day. We were able to sail that together week after week in the summers. And then on the weekends, on Saturday, it was work with Frank on Saturdays and Sundays, typically sailing in the afternoon. Sometimes it was a full week with Frank of Monday to Saturday in the office, and then Sundays on the boat. But Sunday afternoon was really, these were some of my greatest times with Frank Gehry. The conversations that we had, the wisdom that he shared, the way that he used that time as a way to process the week, think about the week ahead, and think about the future and the direction he was going with the office, where the projects were heading, where he wanted to take them, where his interests were. And participating in those sales, listening to conversations he had with guests, some of whom were clients or collaborators. A lot of sales with Greg Lynn, sales with his sons. Alejo, his older son, was someone who loved sailing too and would be out there, and Sam was out there, and Carrie and Joyce. I think I remember one sail with Alejo and Carrie, I think in the summer of 2011 or something like that. We just had a really, really wonderful time being out there, and it was the times that Frank just felt alive. He would really breathe. He would be steering the boat, or I'd be steering, or Greg, and he just looked out at the horizon. He looked at the sails. He contemplated what type of experience he wanted to shape in the office, in his career, for his family, who he loved dearly. And he was just one of the most generous bosses in that regard. And I will forever be grateful for the times that we had together, the wisdom that he shared, and the trust that he put in me. And truly, truly honored to know Frank and have the chance to work with him.
Aaron, don't be so designy, and don't ever show me that again, was some of the things Frank would say to me sometimes when I'd show him really bad stuff. I have an art background, so I trained as an artist in 4 years of art school before I started working with Frank. Ceramics, printmaking, drawing, woodworking, and I had also been building and restoring wooden boats, so I really fell right into the studio. I'd been working with some friends of Frank's, and they asked me to go do a sculpture project with me, and we didn't have a fabrication shop, so they sent me to Franco Gehry and Associates in Santa Monica, and I stayed there for 15 amazing years that I'm so grateful for. It was really an art factory, but it was so amazing because you really felt like you were involved in everything and really contributing, because Frank kept it small so he could keep his hands in everything. I've only had 2 9-to-5 jobs in my life working for somebody else that I've lasted. One was working for Frank for those 15 years, and the other is building and restoring wooden boats. And it was a really amazing experience while I was there.
Good afternoon. My name is Adam Wheeler. I worked at FOGA starting in 1997 until 2003, where it had changed names to Gehry Partners, and we had moved to Playa Vista. The first day, I recall when I worked there, it was the week before Bilbao was to open, and half of the office was heading off to the opening. So our task as new model builders, the new hirees, was to refurbish the models that were going to be put on display and crate them up and make sure that they did not get damaged in their travels to Spain. It was right away long nights, fast action, not a lot of time to take any breaks, and very exhilarating. as a incoming, recently graduate student in architecture. So from then on, due to the success of Bilbao and many projects coming through, there were many long days and long nights and long weekends as we were all tasked to bring Frank's vision to life in models, mock-ups, any kind of molds, things like that. It was really amazing energy in the office, and we were kind of the mavericks of Los Angeles, and the architecture scene at the time was really full of energy, in Santa Monica especially. And it was really just an amazing time, amazing group of people who we really felt like we were changing the world in the art and architecture world, and with projects all over the globe, essentially at the time. And the teams were constantly working competitions, projects under construction, projects in design, kind of everywhere. And so for those great memories and the great teamwork, I'll always remember these experiences. One of my favorite memories of my time there was in fall of 2001 when Frank was invited to do a retrospective at the Guggenheim in New York. He and the partners and Berta decided to fly the whole office out to New York, and the whole office went to celebrate with him and the partners and the family to really enjoy the fruits of his labor and our labor. And it was really a crazy moment to be in the Guggenheim, to see the people that you worked with, to see Frank so proud and so happy. And I really cherish that, and to be a part of that moment was really valuable. And I'm honored to have been there, to witness, to be a participant in Frank's language and growth and design process. We will miss him very much. We will miss his voice. We will miss his rebelliousness, his way of promoting Los Angeles and what this great city has to offer artistically and architecturally. And for those moments and memories, I will always be thankful. And so thank you, Berta, and thank you, Frank, thank you, partners, and FOGA and GP, and rest in peace. You were one of a kind, and you will be missed, but your legacy lives on in your art and your language. And thank you, Frank.
One of the best moments of working for Frank is kickoff meeting for Beekman Tower. It was a kickoff meeting, so the client team, our team, and all the consultants were meeting for the first time. And I flew to New York with my counterpart, John, and Frank, Jim, Craig, and Terry to New York. So I have 4 partners, and John, who's sharing project architect position with me, but who's 10 years senior of me and with a lot more experience. We were at a meeting with 30, 40 people, all the heads of the companies who are working on the projects. So John and I were sitting by the entrance because we were running the meeting. And our 4 partners were sitting across the table, a little bit to the side. Client team right in front of us, across the table, and all the consultant teams were sitting around this big giant table. And we started introducing ourselves, and of course John starts and went around the table. and everybody at the table is introducing themselves as the heads of the companies, right? So, you know, partner, principal, president of, you know, the companies. So it went around the entire table, and I'm the last one to introduce myself to the team. And at this point, I'm feeling a little intimidated and insecure, because out of 30, 40 people at the table, I am one of 3 women sitting at the table. 2 from the client team who were incredible. But there were only 3 of us, I believe. And so I'm outnumbered. And everybody, you know, introduced themselves. I mean, including Frank, they're all partners, the presidents and principals. And I started my introduction. I'm Leslie Wilson. I'm an associate at Gehry Architects, New York. And I kind of got stuck. And I think I paused for 1 second, feeling very insecure. But Frank just didn't miss a beat, and he jumped in right there and declared to the table saying, oh, and she's the only one who knows everything about the project. She's the mom, and she's the only one who knows the project inside out and sideways. So if you have any questions, you have to call her. And I mean, everybody smiled. And for me, I know for sure that is the reason that my experience with the project is so incredible, because I didn't have my insecurity looming over me. And he secured my position in that project, and had incredible memories of working on that project. And I know that really set the tone for me, and it was so generous. And it's a moment that I'll never forget. I don't know, I will be always grateful for him for doing that. I know he did feel my insecurity at that second, and without hesitation, he jumped in and he positioned me right for the project, and I'll be forever grateful.